We've been talking about a lot this semester about story and trying to understand what it means to be human through telling stories. And we realized that everything kind of tells a story, whether it's like music that tells the story, both of music, right? Where each genre, each different album kind of builds into kind of the history of music itself. And you can explore how the elements of various musics kind of have evolved, and you can understand how kind of blues and jazz spawns the rock and roll, which then spawns pop, which then spawns, your kind of right now, I think right now the big kind of underground pop is hyper pop that's happening right now. Um, you can see how that all kind of moves and how that all kind of connects. And if you don't understand that story of music, you don't understand kind of where things came from, how they got there, and what you're listening to. And same thing with movies. You see movies kind of move, that you see the genres shift. You see um, at the same time various genres becoming very much popular, right? Early 2000s is just dominated by rom-coms. You have usually at times you can see like a plethora of kind of buddy comedies. um, you're starting to see a shift now in movies, how they're made towards streaming. And you can kind of tell a movie that was made for a streaming service versus a movie that was made for the theater. Um, there's little subtle nuances and differences. If you watched Red Notice, the Ryan Reynolds, The Rock, and Gal Gadot, right, you could see that that's made for Netflix. Netflix has a kind of formula now that they make movies off of, and you have big names, you have um, moments that make you laugh, you have action, you have right, you get a formula there, and things get kind of reduced down to that, where you have movies that are following older formulas uh, of what a murder mystery is, what a thriller is. If you watch the Netflix series, kind of The Movie That Made Us, you see how kind of these genres evolve and how you get from movies that 1960s horror really don't scare us. 1950s horror, the Dracula, the first horror of Nosferatu, really to a modern audience don't really scare us, but you see elements get dragged into the future from them, and you see people making movies now kind of dragging elements from them up. And if you don't understand movies as a story, you don't understand how and why these movies are the way they are and what makes them good, besides the fact that you just enjoyed them. So you have that sense of story inside of the arts, right? You have the various painting styles that evolve and change and are reactions to. We didn't really talk about this, but you see a shift in sculpture with like the ready-made revolution, and the surrealists, where you have the shift from elegant sculptures to Duchamp's The Fountain, which is a upside down urinal. Um, there's shifts and reactions against movements, and some of that gets left in the past and looks very dated for painting, sculpture, movies, music, but you see elements coming back into um, things. You see kind of the realism of the Romantic era in painting coming back. You see kind of that 70s funk kind of coming back, especially in early 2000s pop rock. Um, but you definitely see it with like Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars, right? This movement towards funk. being a thing again. The first Songs About Jane by Maroon 5 has a little bit of that element to it that you see and you understand how these things progress. And if you don't understand that, as I said earlier. But also you see how your world, how your personal story is shaped by the music that you listen to, or the art that you consume, the movies that you consume. Uh, you get a sense of feeling of kind of those quotes that come back to you from your favorite book, your favorite movie, whether, and it shapes you in a little bit. It starts to make you think about the world in a certain way, in a certain light. We talked about how the kind of physical shape and makeup of your neighborhood tells a story of what the city is trying to do. But it also kind of shows how your life, how your interactions with people is shaped. So you, in your reflection papers, you have people who live out in the country and their neighbors are miles from each other, right? And you don't have that interaction. We have people who live in the city whose neighbors are right on top of each other, and there's a close-knit community, and it's very walkable. There's a lot of things going on. You have a lot of green spaces that shapes your life, that shows you how to move about in the world. And it gives your life some color or drabness, right? I always get a sense when I go into the Magnificent Mile in Chicago of just dread because of the looming black buildings. It just feels like my world got compressed instead of opened up when you go into a place. Like when I lived in Toronto, where you go and you're walking and all these buildings, and you walk towards Hyde Park, and you walk into Hyde Park and you've got a lush green space, or Kensington Market, which is this vibrant, colorful, eclectic space of just different market stalls, different smells. The places we walk through, the places we live, shape our life. There was a philosopher in the early 1900s, well, mid 1900s, Hans Georg Gadamer, who wrote about this understanding of boundaries. We have boundaries in our lives. We have kind of this limit to our ability to think. There are some things we can't think about, we can't understand, because they're not our lived experiences, and they never will be. So I don't know what it's like to grow up impoverished. So I didn't grow up well off, lower middle class, upper lower class, right? I don't fully understand that experience. It's why you have the ultra wealthy who grew up wealthy not being able to relate to people. And I think Bill Gates famously didn't know the price of a gallon of milk, right? And we all laugh and scoff, but that's not the world he inhabits. And so he doesn't think about that. He doesn't think about groceries, where some of us, that consumes us, because we're always thinking about groceries and can I afford food and gas and all of that. That shapes us and tells us who we are and puts those thoughts into our head. And even if we transcended those experiences, they still kind of have traces in our lives in the way that we think. So if you were raised in a certain religious tradition and you have rejected it, there are still parts of that religious thought that shaped you and still play in your everyday life. There are understandings of what justice means, what love means, what being a good neighbor means, that comes into, that you think about, that you hold to, that you hold dear, that may play into that, or you might react against them, but they're still there. There's still that trace of them there. you can't outthink them, or I guess you can outthink them, but you can't really outbelieve them. You can never leave kind of how you are or how you have been shaped behind. There are reasons why you do things the way that you do, how you do them, whether it's from kind of how you think about cleaning your house, right? Those are kind of been built in, nurtured um, by the way that you were raised and the environment you were in, uh, the way that you decorate for Christmas, the way that you think about holidays, right? All have kind of familial ties to them and are baked into who you are as a person. So we all kind of have these boundaries of our story kind of gets hedged into, right? Then we're told a lot in kind of the American dream that we can be whoever we want to be and do whatever we want to do, but that's just simply not true. You look at a lot of success stories and there's money behind that, right? There's people who have the money, or there's networking, right? I know someone who knows someone, right? Or just the drive, right? Some of us just haven't had that sort of work ethic or drive um, built into us. And it's very difficult to create that out of nothing unless we consume stories that help build that up. But still, it'll be a boundary that we're struggling against. So I just want you to think, and hopefully that you've thought through this semester, kind of what are those boundaries that your story kind of has given you. What can you, can't you do based on kind of who you are, how you've been raised to be, how you interact with the world, how the world has told you that you should be, right? Because that's part of the story. We're shaped by our ethnic and religious understandings, our cultural understandings of what we should be, what I should be as um, a white male shapes how I think about myself because there's a cultural story attached to that. Um, there's a cultural story attached to your sexual and gender identity, right? How you should be, how you should act, what you shouldn't think, what you shouldn't do. So for this reflection paper, I want you to think about that and reflect upon that. What is kind of the boundaries your story has given you?